Good morning, friends. I got up today and checked TMZ to see what kind of crazy celebrity news there is out there. And what do I see but the infamous GypsyRose Blanchard thinking it's a good idea for her to give opinions on whether or not murders should make money on social media. This girl is so tone deaf, friends. This reminds me of whenever she first got out and immediately went on the Vile File podcast and said she doesn't identify as a murderer. So it's really weird that they're sitting there in the TMZ office asking her all these questions as an experienced murderer who went to prison for it, and she's okay with that now. Another weird thing that Gypsy said was that Mackenzie is young, so it'll probably take her like 20 years before remorse really hits her and she grows up some. It hasn't even been 20 years since Gypsy's crime, and she was in her early 20s when she did her murder. So what is she even talking about? If there's one thing we know about Gypsy, she loves to preach. And she doesn't really even seem to care if people laugh at her so long as people have got eyes on her. Because Harvey and Charles at TMZ were definitely laughing at GypsyRose after she walked out and had to cut the mics in order to say what they wanted to say. And Gypsy said she watched all the documentaries that's out on it. The Crash is actually the third. There was an episode of Killer Cases and also a documentary called Mean Girls Killer. Gypsy says she doesn't think that the documentary did Mackenzie any favors, but then turns around and says that she doesn't think that Mackenzie specifically should be able to monetize on social media whenever she gets out. And that is so wild, friends, considering one of the really big differences between GypsyRose and Mackenzie's murders is that GypsyRose used social media to find her tool and plan matricide. As far as we know, social media was just kind of an aside hobby for Mackenzie Shirilla to feed her own narcissism. But the audacity of GypsyRose Blanchard never ceases to amaze. It's audacity on an inhuman level, audacity that only a murderer could have, in my opinion. And Gypsy trotted out her usual excuse, comparing herself to a domestic violence victim. And while I do believe, due to the pizza delivery man incident report, that Dee Dee had the capacity to be violent, Gypsy's stories have been so exaggerated and proven so many lies that we can't just believe her whenever she says that. Gypsy also planned her murder for multiple years. I just posted a video the other day reading Nick's messages with his friend Allie, and Nick told her Gypsy changed her mind, and Allie said about killing her mom. So even though I think Mackenzie absolutely had intent to murder whenever she crashed into that building, other people are unsure. However, there is no question about GypsyRose Blanchard's intent. It's all documented. Pretty much everybody who's followed her case has seen the knife instruction video, and there's just no getting around how many years she spent planning that on social media. And now she's a social media influencer. Knowing how GypsyRose operates, I'm sure she felt the need to get out ahead of people comparing her to Mackenzie Shirilla in the sense of coming out of prison a murderer and becoming a social media influencer. Because I feel like anyone who's watched the documentary knows that's Mackenzie's goal, in my opinion. Now, if you're watching this video and you followed the Shirilla case at all, you probably already know this. However, in case anyone doesn't know, I wanted to share that Dominic's older sister, the one who was featured in the documentary The Crash, has a podcast where she corrects narratives, she shares more information, she shares family photos of Dominic whenever he was younger, and a lot of interesting stuff. I like to try and get most of my information about the case from her at her channel because, like I said, she corrects a lot of misinformation. One recent thing that she corrected was Annie Elise, Annie 10 to Life. I'm a big fan. However, she put out an incorrect thing saying that Mackenzie's blood wasn't tested until the blood draw from days later in the hospital. And Christine Russo, Dominic's sister, showed evidence that she was actually had a blood draw on the life flight, and that's the one that was tested and showed the THC. So, like I said, I like to get my information directly from her. Because no matter how good or conscientious a content creator is, mistakes can still happen. So, whenever there's a source like this directly putting out information, I like to go there. Another cool thing that she's doing is a petition to revamp and reinstate old Son of Sam laws. And I think this is absolutely great. I'm signing the petition. I'll put a link to it in the description, and I encourage everyone to who's interested in this. I feel like this law is a really good thing that is of interest to us who followed the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard in that case, because it would have been wonderful, in my opinion, had there been something in place like that to prevent GypsyRose from being able to monetize off of her matriciding fame. When laws like this are changed, it's usually because victims' families get the change made. Lawmakers are so much more inclined to pay attention to someone directly affected by a crime and proposing a law to help mitigate their victimhood and suffering based on what these criminals are able to do. Now, I know a lot of people in the space of covering the case of the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard have wanted to try and advocate for something like this. However, my personal feeling was always that that just wasn't going to be a realistic goal unless it came from Dee Dee's family. And I've read enough of Dee Dee's family's changing opinions over the years and their extremely poor opinion of Dee Dee, and I just felt like that was just never going to happen in this space. However, this seems absolutely realistic to me as something that she might actually be able to accomplish because she is a direct victim of this murder crime by being Dominic's sister. So, like I said, I will be signing this petition, and I hope everyone else does too. I think it's really important, friends. I want to know what all of y'all think in the comments, though. Have you watched any of Christine's videos? Did you watch the crash? And what do you think about Gypsy weighing in and preaching that another murderer should be banned off social media if she gets out? Let me know in the comments, friends. We'll go out with a palate cleanser. Have a good day.